figuring out in my head, but after that it's a guess. I mean, I don't know exactly what. I know that with 72, roughly this will go below that, this will not go above that. What do you mean? Is that I didn't guess, I calculated. I can't calculate exactly, but I can calculate roughly. Okay, all right. So, of course, now the question is, which one are you going to pick? Yeah? Shh. Yeah?
I think ROI outweighs NPV.
Okay, all right. So we have one student claiming that he would like to go with a higher DCF ROI, so that means go with B. Anybody has a different point of view? Yeah?
I would still go with C because you have the greatest total profit.
Okay, all right.
If you're only investing in one project, you can't make up for having less investment. So you have, having better return doesn't help you out as much as having better total profit.
Okay, yeah.
I also think it's dependent on how much you actually have initially to like.
How much you have? You have zero money, no money. You just borrow.
Yeah.
But the assumption is the bank is willing to give you the money at 10%. In all these problems, so that's why I use the benchmark of 10%, assuming you can borrow at 10%. If you make more than that, so you can clearly see that all three projects are profitable, right? That's the first thing. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be a ratio for the ROI to the fixed cost investment?
All right, so okay, so now let's try to maybe rationalize this in a. So let's, usually the answer always can become very obvious once you start really thinking about what you're actually doing here. So if you think about it, to do project A, you're borrowing 100 from the bank. To do project B, you're borrowing 150. To do project C, you're borrowing 200, right? And at the end of the project life, this NPV is basically the net value, that means the net amount you have earned, right? After taking care of already the interest. So with that description, as you basically say, it kind of makes more sense that you'll go with NPV, right? Because NPV really reflects how much money you earn. Yes? The rate kind of doesn't matter because you're borrowing different amounts from the bank, right? So the rate is kind of a little bit more complicated. But NPV is basically the amount of money you have earned when the project is over. Right? After taking into account interest. Yes, everybody agrees with that? So once you say that, I think it becomes very clear that you should go with the highest NPV. Does it make sense, or do you still disagree with that? Yeah. Yeah.
Is it highest NPV or highest difference between like what you borrowed and the NPV?
No, because what you borrowed has already been taken care of to calculate NPV, right? So remember NPV, what is NPV? NPV is what you borrowed. Let's just call it FCIL, right? Minus 1 plus I to power 10, right? So you already taken into account what you borrowed, plus the cash flow, yearly cash flow, times 1 plus I to power 10 minus 1 divided by I. So this is the future value of the cash flows. So you can see this difference is already taken into care of, so you already returned the money. The idea is that you already returned the money that you borrowed. Right? This is the net that is left. So this is really the real money earned after 10 years. Does that make sense? But there's another way of looking at this problem, which will still give you the same answer. You can also think of it like this. To choose between B and C, you could also ask yourself that fine, to do C, you need to borrow extra 50 from the bank, right? So you can think of a pseudo project. A pseudo project that basically means going from B to C, right? For the pseudo project, what will be the FCIL? 50, right? And what will be the extra annual cash flow? 12. So now you can calculate NPV for this extra, for this pseudo project. And let's calculate what that is. And project life is still 10. So for this, the NPV will be, somebody calculate it? Very good. So you will see that the difference, the pseudo project NPV will also be simply the difference in the NPV itself. Right? And so this will be 567 minus 628, which is going to be 33, 53, 61, right? And the DCFRR you can calculate, of course, it will be greater than 10%. I don't know what it will be. Maybe probably in the range of maybe 20% or something, right? So therefore you can see that even to go, so project B was profitable, the extra project to go from B to C is also profitable because it has positive NPV. So clearly you'll go with C.
So
Yeah.
if I were to calculate C going to B, then I would notice that I'd be losing money in that case by a certain amount as well.
Well, yeah.
So that would be indicative, or it would indicate to me that that would be a not as good.
Yeah, you could think of it like this, but to go to C to B is very artificial because you're borrowing less money. Right? It's just more natural to think of it borrowing extra money to go from B to C.
Yeah, wait, you can't even do C to B because then you get two negative numbers. Like, you know right off the bat you're losing. You do 60
But you
minus-
have, well, you are kind of spending less money and also you're making less money. So both are negative, so the net difference could still be positive. But anyway, let's not worry about it. It's just natural. Let's just think of B to C because that's really the more natural way to think about it. Yeah?
But you could calculate an adjusted project life that would prove like B being more profitable than C, correct?
If they have the same project life, I don't think changing n will make a difference. And it could.
But it has to though, because one
No, I mean, I think in this problem, if you go to n equals to 1, then yeah, it will make a difference. Because, but if n equals to 1, I guess none of these projects are profitable, right? So yeah, n will make a difference. N being the project life, yes. So like for if n was 3 years, well, this is clearly not going to be profitable. This will barely be profitable. This will also not be profitable, I think. Right? So I think if n equals to 3 years, none of them are going to be profitable. N equals to 5. So yeah, the final result answer will depend upon n. Okay? So does that make sense? So really, the bottom line is if you have multiple options with different initial investment and different yearly cash flows, you finally think of NPV. NPV is really more natural way of looking at which project to choose. Yes?
If payback period is like it plays into play, like the payback period would a lot better in B and C, would that play a role?
I would think payback period would also be a natural way to look at it, but I think the cleanest way to think about it is NPV. Because you have to think about what are you really trying to maximize, right? So, okay, fine, you minimize payback period, but does that mean that you also have higher profits in the period after the payback period? Because they are both 0, right? But they're all non-linear. So I'll have to think about it a little bit to see that the payback period will exactly reflect. Like you can see that DCFROR doesn't predict it correctly, right? So NPV is the most natural because that's really what you're trying to optimize clearly, right? Because you want to maximize how much money you're going to earn for yourself or for the company, for the shareholders or whatever. And that's precisely NPV, right? And so maximizing NPV should be the goal. And so you have different project choices. You should think of maximizing NPV, not the DCFROR. Now, you could have been asked the question slightly differently. You could have said, well, we can choose not just one project, but maybe more than one project, right? So let's say that you could have chosen, you could have said, well, I have unlimited amount of money. Then what should I do? Sorry? Well, then you have to think about, the ratio. Because you could say, so let's say that you have 600. Okay? So let's say you only have 600. So then you are asked, you can obviously do 6 of A, or 4 of B, or 3 of C. Or of course you can do 2 of C and 2 of A or whatever different combination, right? So then of course the thinking will change. Right?
Then you care about DCF ROI.
Well, you still care about NPV, but the NPV will depend upon how many of each project you do. So implicitly, eventually, you will see that DCF ROI will become the way to calculate it. But still, you want to maximize NPV. But if you have 600, you can say, okay, you can do 3 of C, so the NPV will be 3 times this, right? But here you can do 4, so the NPV will be 4 times this. And 4 times this is larger than 3 times that, so you'll of course do it C, right? And that's because the DCF ROI there is higher. Does this make sense? So you have unlimited money and you can do multiple projects, then yeah, you'll always go with higher DCF, but that's never the case. You cannot do more than one project, right? Because you need to be there. You need to play an active role in running the company. Does it make sense? All right, any questions? Can I move on? Okay. So there are a few important things to see here. One is that clearly in these situations you go with maximum NPV. The other important thing is to see that the NPV of a project, of a pseudo project, is just difference between the NPVs themselves. Does that make sense? So NPV to go from B to C, you can calculate it, will simply be the difference in the NPVs. And that's another way of looking at it, why you maximize NPV. Although it's actually quite obvious just on the basis of the definition of NPV. All right, so now let's look at another scenario. You can look at another scenario where the project lives are different, right? A more proper situation to essentially, for the same scenario, is buying and selling equipment. So let's say that you are working for a company and the company decides they have to buy a new heat exchanger. And the question is, which heat exchanger